Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I'm making a very special cookie that's actually really easy. It's called Millionaire's Shortbread, also known as caramel square. It's basically a layer of shortbread, a layer of set but still chewy caramel, and then a layer of chocolate on top. It's really easy, and I'm gonna be baking it in my made-in baking slab. So maybe you've never heard of Millionaire's Shortbread, but I know you've heard of Twix, and it is basically that. It is like a layer of shortbread, caramel, and chocolate on top. I know it as Millionaire's Shortbread, but it's just Millionaire because it's like a very rich dessert, like with the caramel and the chocolate, and it's just kind of like fancy and elevated, so that's where it gets the name Millionaire.
Appears to have originated in Scotland.
Okay, so it's a Scotland thing. But I know it's beloved in Australia too, where I think it's known as caramel squares.
Implies a level of decadence, wealth to the sweet treat that is an upgrade from a regular.
Yes. Okay, so in most cases, the caramel layer in Millionaire's Shortbread has a sweetened condensed milk base, and that's what I'm gonna use today. It can skew very, very, very sweet, so I'm just gonna make a couple of like subtle upgrades, I think, that will help to balance everything out and give it balance so it's just not too sweet and it doesn't like hurt your teeth when you bite into it. Really straightforward, mostly pantry stuff, which I love. So for the shortbread bottom, I have all-purpose flour, granulated sugar, 2 sticks of butter, a little vanilla extract, and salt. Very straightforward. Shortbread is like, at its core 3 ingredients: flour, sugar, butter. For the caramel layer, I have a can of sweetened condensed milk, some heavy cream, more butter, more salt, some corn syrup. The corn syrup is really important. It helps keep that layer like soft and chewy and not hard and sticky. Then demerara sugar and a vanilla bean. Vanilla bean I really like because I want a lot of vanilla flavor in that. Then to finish them, chocolate. This is bittersweet chocolate and flaky salt. Special equipment. I'm gonna basically do everything by hand. You don't need a mixer. So I have a bowl, a spatula. I have a large saucepan. That's my made-in stainless clad saucepan for cooking the caramel. And then I'm baking in the made-in baking slab. This works in any 13x9 pan. The first step that I'm gonna do is to make my shortbread. So I'm gonna get set up for that. All right, before we get into the recipe, I wanna thank our friends at Made-In for sponsoring this episode. Made-In is the maker of this beautiful baking slab designed in collaboration with Chef Nancy Silverton. I love the baking slab because it's 100% French porcelain, which is naturally non-porous and non-stick, so it's so easy to clean. I love that it's so beautiful, it can go right on the table. It's also thermal shock resistant, so you can put it from the freezer to the oven, to the table. It is oven safe up to 650 degrees. It's really one of the most versatile pieces of bakeware that I have at home. I'm also gonna use their stainless clad 4-quart saucepan in this recipe to cook the caramel and to melt the chocolate. I love the 5-ply construction of this stainless cookware because there's such even heating, so it's perfect for things like caramel and all my pastry preparation, so I know it's not gonna burn, which is great. I'm also about to make lunch in my made-in enamel cast iron cookware. So we're a made-in household here. I love using all their products. For more on the baking slab and the full line of cookware, you can go to the link below and save on your order. The first step for my Millionaire's Shortbread is to just make the shortbread. At its core, like an incredibly simple cookie. It's butter, sugar, and flour, and that's it. So there's a lot of ways to like jazz it up. Sometimes people add a little bit of baking powder to lighten it. Sometimes people add, you could add like chopped nuts, you could add cocoa powder. I'm going really, really straightforward. And Millionaire's Shortbread needs a very, very sturdy base for the caramel and the chocolate on top. So I'm not adding anything else to it really. But like a chopped nut would be kind of nice. If you toasted it, then it helps to sort of offset some of the sweetness. So I'm gonna start, sometimes with shortbread, you just end up like you mix the flour and sugar and you like rub in the butter. I'm gonna start by actually just creaming the butter and sugar a little bit. My butter is sort of cool room temp. I'm gonna get that into my bowl. And I'm gonna save the paper because I'm gonna actually line my baking slab with a little bit of parchment, and the like residue from the butter is gonna help the parchment stick. So I'm gonna save those. This is just 2 sticks or 1 cup or 8 ounces. So then I'm gonna add my sugar. This is 2/3 of a cup. I'm just using granulated. You could use brown sugar if you wanted to. So again, I'm doing this by hand. You could use a hand mixer or a stand mixer, but it's just not necessary. I'm not going to cream this to the level of light and fluffy that I would for a cake, for example. Actually, I'm gonna add my salt. This is a half teaspoon of kosher salt. I'm using Diamond Crystal. If you're using Morton, use half that amount, so quarter teaspoon. So I'm just working this mixture with my spatula until all of the sugar is incorporated. So this is looking nice. It's getting a little fluffy and a little pale, just after a couple minutes of sort of beating it with the spatula. I'm gonna add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. I'm using 2 kinds of vanilla in the recipe. The extract is going into the shortbread just to give it like a little bit of flavor. And then I'm using a vanilla bean in the caramel. Just a teaspoon or so. So now that the vanilla is incorporated, I'm gonna add my flour. This is 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. My oven, by the way, right when we started, I turned it onto 350 to start preheating. So work this gently at first because you don't wanna like fling the flour all over your countertop, like I just did. And then I just wanna start to work the mixture with the spatula to start to break down that butter and incorporate the flour. So now you can see that it's starting to form these kind of big crumbs. Melted butter to me makes it a little greasy by doing it this way. So once I have that flour mostly incorporated and these big kind of wet crumbs, I'm gonna switch to my fingertips actually. So I'm done with my spatula. I'm just gonna clean it off. And I'm just gonna sort of toss everything and feel with my fingertips to make sure there's no big pockets of butter. You just don't want pockets of butter because that is gonna melt and then it's going to create these sort of like weird voids in your shortbread. There's a lot of butter in this recipe. 2 sticks in the shortbread, 6 tablespoons in the caramel plus heavy cream plus sweetened condensed milk. So this is ready. You can see that there's no dry floury spots anymore and everything is like a wet crumb, whether it's a big crumb like that or like little bitsy ones. This looks good. I don't want to overwork it. So now let me just prep my baking slab real quick. I'm going to, I don't really need to grease it, but I do want to line it and that's going to make it easy for me to lift the shortbread out so I can cut it. I'm just using like that light film of butter that's left on the paper to give it a really light coating. This is always the thing my mom did, was like grease something with the butter paper. I'm gonna grab a piece of parchment paper. You could line it with foil, and if you're doing foil, then you don't really need the greasing because the foil you can mold. The shortbread wouldn't stick, that's not the issue. It's just about being able to lift the whole thing out in one piece. So that's why I'm lining it. But this is porcelain, which is naturally nonstick, so the shortbread won't stick, and it won't really stick because there's so much butter in it. It doesn't really stick in glass or metal either. It's just purely functional. So here's my lined pan. Now my shortbread dough is gonna go into the bottom. I'm just gonna scatter these crumbs into an even layer. So then once the crumbs are evenly distributed, I'm gonna start to just pat it down and press. This part I think is fun to do with kids because it's like very tactile and it kind of feels like Play-Doh a little bit, this texture of the dough. I say that having never actually baked with kids. But like Elliot likes to, my nephew likes to like help in the kitchen. So it's like my sister bakes with her kids. That's close enough. I've used my palms and fingertips to pat it down. I'm just gonna grab like a flat bottomed measuring cup to really actually help me make sure everything is well compacted because again, we need that sturdy base. So a measuring cup like this is just a 1 cup measure. You could use the bottom of like a water glass. Something with straight sides makes it easier. If you have sticking, you can always flour the bottom of your measuring cup, like if it's a little warm in your kitchen. So I'm just kind of smoothing to make sure everything is nice and even. So the cracks won't like fill in, but you're also not gonna see them because of the caramel you're gonna pour on top. So it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, like if you were rolling out dough to cut sugar cookies, you wouldn't want that. But this doesn't have to be like that. So this looks really good. My oven is preheated, it's at 350 right now. So we're gonna bake this, but before I bake it, I do want to prick the shortbread all over with a fork. So I'm gonna grab that. So this pricking with the fork is called docking. Sometimes you do it with puff pastry. And when you see like traditional shortbread, it looks decorative because it has the same pattern, but it does serve a purpose. It's to help encourage evaporation and also to prevent puffing. So this is gonna help it bake through so that the top and the bottom are like done and it's not wet in the middle.
Are you stabbing all the way to the paper or just?
I stabbed all the way down to the bottom, which is only like a 1/2 inch. This is gonna go into my oven and it's gonna bake until the surface is nice and golden brown all over, maybe like 25 minutes. Center rack. All right. I want the color to be a medium golden brown across the surface. I don't want it to be too pale because then the shortbread will have a lot of moisture in it. It could be kind of soft and then it won't hold up to the caramel. And I don't want it to be too dark because then it can dry out and become crumbly, and I don't want that either because then it's hard to cut. So just a medium color, and I'll check it after like 20 minutes. I set my timer, but I said it wrong. I don't really know how long it's been. How long has it been? 20 minutes? Yeah. Probably? Okay, 20-25. I'm gonna stick with that. But it looks really good. Mostly I know that it's done because it smells nice and toasty. So I'm gonna pull it out of the oven, and I'm gonna let it cool while I make the caramel, just so you don't pour hot caramel onto hot shortbread, because that will prevent some of the natural kind of steam releasing from the shortbread, and then it could maybe be a little soggier than I want it to be. This looks really nice. So if you're making this at home, if you notice that there's any areas of your shortbread that have puffed up more than you want them to, you can always go back with that same measuring cup and just like very gently, like a very gentle tamping motion, just kind of deflate it. And I don't want to compact it too much because it's still pretty delicate at this point because it's so hot, but I'm just kind of eliminating any sort of like large air pockets, because again, we want that like sturdy base. But this looks very, very beautiful. I love the way that this bakes in the baking slab. It bakes so incredibly evenly. I know that there'll be that same color on the bottom. So this is gonna cool, and as it's cooling, I'm gonna make my caramel. To make the caramel, there's a lot of variations on caramel for Millionaire shortbread, but they all kind of get to the same endpoint, which is a caramel that is soft enough to slice and to be chewy, but not so soft that it's gonna ooze everywhere, because you want like nice straight sides to your shortbread. So sometimes it calls for just sweetened condensed milk that's cooked to this sort of like dark color. Sometimes it calls for just sugar with cream, like more of a traditional caramel. So I'm sort of splitting the difference, and I'm using, you could use granulated sugar, you could use brown sugar. I'm using demerara. You could swap in one of the other ones, it's not that important. But I love demerara sugar. I love that it's a less refined sugar. I love that unlike brown sugar, it doesn't like get dry and clumpy and then impossible to measure. So it's like, just sits in my pantry, I don't have to think about it, and it does dissolve like regular sugar, because it is sugar. So I'm gonna start with a cup of demerara. If you don't have that or you don't wanna go out and get it, you can just swap in granulated. Then I'm gonna add 6 tablespoons of butter. So it's the fat content in the caramel that is gonna give it that soft chewiness that you want. So butter goes in, I'm gonna just scrape off anything left on the wrapper. Then a half a cup of corn syrup. This is really the key to that soft, like sliceable texture of the caramel. It's called an invert sugar, meaning it's liquid at room temp. So I'm gonna add this. Often, because this is a popular recipe in the UK, often you'll see like golden syrup, which is like a different form of invert sugar that we don't really have here in the US. But here, corn syrup, light corn syrup is much easier to find. No, Kitty, no, 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 don't do it, don't do it. Bad decision making. Okay, then I have 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream. So this is also gonna contribute like that milky flavor to the caramel plus some fat. Then kosher salt. I'm not making the actual caramel itself super salty because I'm gonna put flaky salt over top of the chocolate. So I don't wanna like overdo the salt. So all sweetened condensed milk comes in the exact same size can, which is 14 ounces. And it is the most annoying ingredient in the entire world to like save leftovers of. So always try to use a full can in a recipe. But it's like, who's gonna go back and use like 3 tablespoons of sweetened condensed milk in something?
Put it in your coffee.
Ooh, you could make like a Vietnamese coffee with it. Okay, that's a good idea. But still, I'm just gonna use the whole thing. So the last ingredient is a whole vanilla bean. You could use a half if you are conserving them. And I don't really use a lot of whole vanilla in baking because of the price, but this is, I think, an instance where it's really worth it. So I'm gonna split it lengthwise. If you don't wanna use whole vanilla at all, you can use extract and or paste, which are both great. But here I love seeing the seeds, and I love that like the whole thing infuses the flavor of the caramel. I made a slit with the very tip of my paring knife lengthwise down the bean, but I didn't cut all the way through. I kind of just cut through one side of the kind of skin of the bean, and inside are all these little specks, all the seeds. So I sort of open up that slit, I put my finger at the top, then I use the dull side of the paring knife and I apply a lot of pressure. I scrape down. This is a really juicy vanilla bean. Look at all the seeds. It's like a teaspoon of seeds. So the seeds go in. Then I like to make a second pass just to make sure I've scraped everything out that I can. So I kind of go the other direction actually. And then because of how precious vanilla beans are, I always save the pod. And actually in this case, I'm going to add it into my caramel because the pod has a lot of flavor. And I'm going to cook this caramel kind of low and slow. I'll talk about why. So it can infuse the caramel as it cooks. So that's going to go in. I'll take it out later. That's going to go in. Now I'm just going to start to warm this over medium heat. Full disclosure, I did forget to talk about one piece of special equipment at the top of the episode, and that is a thermometer. So I'm going to use instant read. I don't know why I don't have a candy thermometer here, but you can use a candy thermometer because we're going to cook this to 240 Fahrenheit. This process of cooking caramel is not really the same as cooking caramel starting from like just sugar and water, where then like you're cooking that to a dark color, then you're adding dairy, then you're cooking it back up. This is just sort of one cooking operation where we're bringing the whole mixture up to that 240 mark. And what you want to do is cook it slowly. There's a couple reasons. One is the slower you cook it, meaning with the lower the temperature, the more even the cooking will be, and you're less at risk of areas that are kind of scorching. And I'm going to stir it constantly, basically. So this step is relatively easy, but it does take a little bit of time. So plan on being by the stove watching it for the entire time that it's cooking. The other thing that you get from cooking it a little bit more slowly is better browning of all the ingredients, like the sweetened condensed milk and the sugar that's in there. So if you were to just boil this really, really rapidly and cook it to 240, you're gonna have a pale caramel. When you want something that's more like golden and brown and caramel colored and more appealing looking. I don't want just like a pale layer in my Millionaire shortbread. So I'm gonna bring this up. Make sure you stir well, especially at the beginning, to dissolve that sugar. If you have a candy thermometer, go ahead to wait to clip it to the side of the pot until you see bubbling. But I'm using an instant read, so I'm just gonna check it periodically after the first several minutes of boiling. Once you've stirred it over medium and the sugar is dissolved, you can increase the heat to then bring it to the boil, so you're not waiting all that time in the very beginning. So you can go more like medium high. And then once you have nice boiling, rapid boiling, bring it down after like a minute or two. And then you want to go the rest of the way on that kind of like medium heat. So a lot of recipes also will tell you for Millionaire shortbread to just basically like cook it until you see this nice medium caramel color or light caramel color. I'm sure that works and people have no problem, but I like to be really certain, so that's why I use the thermometer. I just feel like I don't want there to be really that guesswork when I know I can be 100% certain that it's done. So anyway, that's just my little note on using temperature for this stage.
Sounds different, but looks the same.
Yeah. If I stop stirring, it will start to bubble. So the caramel is looking so good. You can see it's gotten very thick. This is why you don't want to push the heat too high. It's one of many reasons. But one of the reasons is it's a very sticky caramel, meaning it really wants to catch or burn on the bottom. So if you're not constantly stirring, that's going to happen very, very quickly. So just that medium heat is perfect. You can see that the color has transformed into this really nice, beautiful, almost like mocha color. I'm just gonna take the temperature. So the last time I tempted, which was a couple minutes ago, it was just over 230. And once, it takes a little while for it to climb through the teens and 20s, but once you get into 30, that means that you've reduced it enough where the temperature will start to increase a little bit faster. 235, 236, 237. Ow, I just touched the side. Ah! Okay, so maybe got a little hot. So I'm gonna pluck out this vanilla bean. And now I'm gonna pour this over my shortbread. Don't scrape the very bottom of the saucepan thoroughly because that's gonna be a little bit hotter than the rest of the caramel. And you might get like weird little hardened pockets on the surface, so you don't want that. But you can scrape the sides. That's pretty safe. So now that I have the caramel on my base, I just want to quickly, before it starts to set too much, spread it out into an even layer across the whole surface. Oh my gosh, this looks so good, and I love seeing all the little vanilla specks. There's like so many. That was such a good vanilla bean. So now that I have this nice even surface with wall-to-wall caramel, I just want to let this cool. I'm going to let it sit at room temp for a little bit because it's really hot right now. But after about 20 minutes of cooling at room temp, I'm just gonna pop it in the fridge so it can continue chilling. It's just gonna be a lot faster if it gets cold. This looks great. I know that caramel is gonna be like soft and lightly chewy, but hold its shape and not ooze out when I cut the squares. So the final step is chocolate. We do that after it's cold. I let the caramel cool for like 20 minutes or so at room temp, and it really firmed up a lot, but then I stuck it in the fridge just to get it cold so I have a nice solid base for my chocolate, which I'm gonna melt. Now the chocolate layer on Millionaire Shortbread can be anything from just straight melted chocolate to tempered chocolate to ganache to a kind of glaze, like a little corn syrup in it. So I'm just going straight melted chocolate because I don't think it really like gives it that much more. I don't need like more cream in it, you know, with ganache. So I'm just gonna melt the chocolate. I have 7 ounces. And I'm doing a slightly thinner layer of chocolate than you see sometimes on Millionaire Shortbread. And I'm using a bittersweet chocolate. This is like a 68% chocolate, so not like super, super bitter. And anytime you're melting chocolate, I found that if you go 70 or above, there's just like a high likelihood of the chocolate kind of splitting or separating like from the cocoa fat when you melt it. So I like to stay in the 60% range. And the most important thing is that the water isn't boiling rapidly and that it's not touching the bottom of the bowl. So I have about 1 inch of water in the bottom. The bowl goes on top. Make sure there's no water in the bowl because if you're melting straight chocolate and a little water gets in, it's a high likelihood that it's going to seize, which is like it becomes kind of like weird and crumbly and not smooth. So I am going to turn down my heat and I'm just going to stir this. I'm just going to let it go and I'll see the chocolate start to melt and then I'll just stir it until it's smooth. You're telling me that that cat can't go on the end of the episode? Look at that cat. He's like a king. I like Spud also. Okay, I'll just let this melt a little more. My chocolate is fully melted. I can turn the heat off. And you can take it off the heat once you see that it's like 98% melted. If you have little pieces of chocolate, they'll just melt from carryover. So the final step for the Millionaire Shortbread is just putting on that chocolate layer. Oh, one pro tip is that when you're melting chocolate, dry off the bottom of the bowl because then if you like put it into something else, sometimes drips can get on. You don't want that. So I'm just gonna scrape my chocolate over my caramel layer.
Is that enough chocolate?
Yeah, I'm not doing a very thick chocolate layer. And also one thing that I've learned in my recipe development is that very often when you're like making something in a slab like this, you're really like prone to thinking that the layer is not very thick and then you go ahead and you cut it and you're like, oh no, that's fine. It kind of looks thinner than it really is. So the caramel was a little bit cold from the fridge. So you just wanna, no Ringo, you just wanna work fast enough so that the chocolate doesn't set. No kitty, 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 no. 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 I'm sorry, kitty, to go away. So because the caramel was a little bit cold from the fridge, just on the surface, I just want to work fast enough that the chocolate doesn't really start to set, but I'm not having much of an issue with that. So now I have an even layer over everything, and I might just make a couple nice strokes to give it a little surface texture. But of course I'm going to slice these, so it's not like you're going to see that pattern. This looks so beautiful. I'm so excited to cut into these, but of course it needs to set. Now before that chocolate starts to harden, I am going to top it with some flaky salt. And I have a fan blowing this way, so I'm going to angle my sprinkle in case it gets blown. Salted desserts are so common now. 10 or 15 years ago, a lot less common. But I think most people sort of understand that salt and chocolate and caramel go really, really well together. You could put other stuff on top here if you wanted to add some more texture. You could put like cocoa nibs, could be kind of cool. Chopped nuts of some kind if you feel like it. I think this looks really beautiful. Just one last tiny little sprinkle. Okay, and now I'm just gonna let these sit at room temp until they're fully cooled. Sometimes it can be easier to slice them when they're cold, but I think my caramel's pretty firm because I think maybe it went a couple degrees over where I was shooting for. So I'm just gonna let this sit until the chocolate is fully set, and if I need to, I can pop it in the fridge for a few minutes just to get the chocolate hard, and then we'll cut them. So when I touch the bottom of the baking slab, it is room temp, slightly cool to the touch, so I'm gonna unmold them. This is why I did that parchment paper, because I can use the ends just to help me lift it out. It's also why I like doing this in the baking slab, so I don't have high sides so I have to clear. On the sides that are unlined, I'm just gonna stick my offset spatula to loosen it a little. Oh, very satisfying, by the way. I'm gonna use that same spatula just to kind of run this underneath and all around to loosen. Because I want each piece to be this really nice, even square with clean sides all the way around, I'm gonna just trim ever so slightly around all 4 sides. The trim is the cook's treat. It's also great, like if you're bringing it to a party or something, you can sample it ahead of time to make sure that it's good. I'm gonna cut these small because it's like buttery shortbread, buttery caramel, chocolate. It's kind of intense. So I think small portions are good. It's always easiest to cut when you can go in halves and then halves again. I could also cut them into bars. Here, let me, a little container for trim. The caramel might get like really hard, but I bet you could still chew it. Chocolate's not 100% set, as you can see on my knife. I'm just gonna cut half for now. I'm gonna cut them into little bars. I think that's cute. I actually kind of feel like the hardest part of making these, besides just all the time at the stove stirring, is cutting them. So some tips, kind of like a don't do what I did. Wait until it's fully set. The chocolate was set on top, but like not totally against the caramel. But also just be patient and clean your knife. So run it under really hot water and then dry it off between cuts. And then you should be good. So I want to take a look at the cross section. It's kind of like 3 parts shortbread, 2 parts caramel, 1 part chocolate, which I think is kind of perfect. And the shortbread looks great. It's a little bit golden on the bottom. It's not wet, but it's not so dry that it like crumbled all over the place when I was cutting. So to serve these, I'm just gonna put them actually back on my baking slab, which is conveniently doubles as a cute serving tray. I haven't eaten lunch. I'm very excited to eat these right now because I'm a little hungry, but they look so good. I like the 3 bite size. I think that is appropriate for Millionaire shortbread where there's just like a lot of intensity everywhere. But really, like all the best desserts, it's a textural thing. The chewy caramel and the crumbly, buttery shortbread. So I'm excited. I'm gonna try this one. Almost like before the bite, the vanilla aroma hits you. The caramel, even though I took it like a couple degrees past where it probably should have been, it's not too hard. It has that like really pleasant chew. It also kind of starts to like melt with the heat of your mouth and the chocolate. And I'm also glad that it's bittersweet, so it's there to kind of balance out the sweetness. And then I really love the hit of salt at the end. What a great cookie. I feel like it's a really fun recipe. It requires a little bit of tending for the caramel, but overall, like pretty low tech. You don't need a lot of equipment, just a candy thermometer. And huge payoff, especially if you make it in a 13 by 9 pan, like the Made in baking slab, because you can cut little ones and have like a ton of cookies to share. You can make a lot, cut them small. They're so rich, hence the name, and they're just a lot of fun to make. So I want to thank our friends at Made In for sponsoring the episode and for making the baking slab one of my favorite pieces of bakeware. And don't forget to like and subscribe.